Hello and welcome back to The Racing Gears, a series in which I'll talk to some of the great names in motorsport, past and present, and find out the behind the scenes and behind the visor stories of the greatest sport in the world. Today's guest is a man I've had the privilege of getting to know over the last year or so, helping him with his Formula 3 car. But this man's no stranger to the racetracks, as he's one of the great minds behind the most successful Formula 1 car to have ever campaigned. It won Ayrton Senna his first World Championship and won all but one of his 1988 races. That car was, of course, the McLaren MP44, and this man is, of course, Steve Nichols. Steve, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
So if we start from the beginning, really, and what was your first memory of motorsport?
Well, my first memory of motorsport was, I guess, goes all the way back to 1961 when I started go-kart racing. So, long time ago.
Did you go and watch races as well, or was it you were trying to get into the hot seat, really?
Yeah, I'd been to one or two kart races and thought it looked like a lot of fun. And initially, I just wanted some old cart that I could charge around on the streets. You know, my parents thought that'd be dangerous, so they got me a racing cart instead, thinking of a more controlled, safer environment, not thinking that I'd actually race, but of course, that's what inevitably followed.
And you were interested in all things mechanical, really, so you went to Utah University and...
That's right. I guess partly born out of the kart being a mechanical thing, and I'd, along with my dad, maintain it myself and rebuilt a little two-stroke engine, that sort of thing. So
yeah, and
that gave me a liking for all things mechanical and taking things apart, putting them together, and also at about that same time, this would have been 1962. I became interested in Formula One. There was an article in Road and Track magazine in America. It was the cover article called Chapman's Tubeless Wonder, and a picture of the Lotus 25.
Right.
I was quite taken by the simple elegance of the Lotus 25 and decided then that I wanted to be a Formula One designer. So that led me into a technical sort of education in high school, and then further on into university, getting a degree in mechanical engineering.
And from there you became aerospace engineer in Utah?
Yeah, that's right. My first job was with Hercules, and I was working on rocket motors for the Trident submarine-based missile system. And specifically, I was working on the third stage motor. It's a solid propellant motor, and it's got a composite case, mostly made out of very little metal in it. It's mostly fiberglass and carbon fiber.
Right.
And we would analyze both the case and the solid propellant with finite element analysis. And then other people, the ballistics people, would analyze the void in the middle where the fire all occurs.
Right.
And they'd be doing CFD effectively on the gas flow and out through the nozzle and how much thrust it would generate, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I suppose it was all pretty high tech for 1972.
And the carbon fibre is interesting, which we'll come back to in a little bit. But how did you go from working in the deserts in Utah to becoming a Formula One designer in the UK? How did that transition happen?
Well, it is kind of interesting because it is a long way from the mountains of the western United States to England, where Formula One occurred.
Yeah,
for the most part. So I pursued my education, got a degree in engineering. I didn't think any of the Formula One teams then, they were quite small affairs back then.
Yeah.
I didn't think any of the teams would hire a completely green, young, new graduate, thinking I needed to get more high-tech experience. So I got this job with Hercules Aerospace, and then I did that for 4 years, which was good experience. And And then my first job in motorsport, I got a job with Gabriel, a damper manufacturer in America, and they wanted to build high-tech dampers for IndyCars.
Right.
And so they hired me, and that's where I first started working with many of the major IndyCar teams doing dampers. And we were doing dampers for Vels, Parnelli Jones, and Chaparral, and AJ Foyt, and Penske, and
Some serious names.
Our dampers made quite a big initial impact, and then it was everybody wanted them. It seemed like,
Yeah.
And I was able to do some interesting things there and design some pretty sophisticated dampers, and it expanded my knowledge of dampers and vehicle dynamics in general. And a lot of those things, the damper characteristics, are what I still do today.
Yeah.
And with our little Formula 3 cars or other friends' cars, various classes, you're looking at spring rates and wheel rates and natural frequencies and critical damping factors, and coming up with a little recipe, so to speak, for the damping that suits the car characteristics, the spring characteristics, all of that sort of thing. So, quite a few years later, the physics still applies, I suppose.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah. Did you sort of go for the job at McLaren, or was that offered to you through working at Hercules? Or
Well, it was through working with the dampers. I had done the dampers for John Barnard's Vels, Parnelli Jones IndyCars, and for his Chaparral car as well. And then he went back to England and to work on a Formula One project. So I called him up looking for a job, and that ended up being the transition from America to Formula One in England.
Yeah, and you're thrown in at the deep end working on the first car would have been the MP42, is that correct?
The first one was the MP41.
Right.
And at this stage it was still, it wasn't even an MP41 yet. It was the project for Formula One car. Yeah. And then in October of 1980, with the amalgamation of Project 4 and Team McLaren, the joint company became McLaren International, and the car became the MP4. Yeah. P4 being for Project 4, and M didn't actually stand for McLaren, it stood for Marlboro, because we were...
Oh, I see, it was a sponsorship,
We were promoting the Marlboro sponsor.
Yeah.
So the cars weren't McLarens at that stage, they were Marlboros.
Oh, I see.
And like I say, the M in MP4 was for Marlboro.
And you bought, going back to your Hercules days, you bought carbon fibre over and thought it was a good idea to start using it in Formula One.
Well, yes. When I first asked John for a job, he told me about the project for Formula One car. And the cars then, it was the ground effects era, so it was desirable to have a very slender monocoque to maximize the width of the ground effect side pods. Yeah. He said he wanted a stiff, they were quite flexible, these skinny chassis, and he wanted a stiffer chassis, but also able to maximize the width of the side pods. So he said he was looking at innovative new materials.
I see.
And, stiffness, new materials. I said, well, that'll be carbon fiber then. And he said, yes, since you guessed, it is carbon fiber that I'm trying to work with, but we haven't been able to find anybody that can manufacture it for us. Yeah. In England, or Europe for that matter. And I said, well, my old colleagues at Hercules, I know that they're keen to expand the use of carbon fiber outside of aerospace, and I think that they'd be very interested in this. Formula One would give them global exposure for carbon fiber in a project that wasn't aerospace. So I contacted them, and they were indeed interested. Gave the details to Ron and John, and they within a week or two ventured to Salt Lake City and eventually did the deal for Hercules to help in the manufacture of the monocoques and the supply of the composite materials.
Yeah.
So, and the rest, as they say, is history, I suppose.
So in 1986, John Barnard leaves to join Ferrari.
Yeah.
Subsequently, you end up chief designer at McLaren Formula One team.
Yes.
What was that moment like?
It was it was great. You thought, well, this is a chance to step forward and see what you can do and take on more responsibility and become a chief designer rather than one of the senior designers.
Yeah.
Stressful.
I bet. Yeah.
As well.
You talk about long days and.
Well, yeah, all of that, and plenty of grey hair. But yeah, it was great, and I know Ron was very nervous about losing his chief designer, and I think in those days you had this sort of symbiotic relationship between a team owner or team principal and their sort of legendary chief designers, John Barnard and Ron Dennis. And Patrick Head and Frank Williams, that sort of thing. And Ron was losing his sort of icon designer.
I see, yeah.
What are we going to do? And so I said to him, well, it's not just John. We've got an established design team here, and we'll just carry on doing the same things we've always done.
Yeah.
It'll be fine,
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, yeah.
And so he was saying things like, well, what'll we do about the aerodynamics? And that's Bob Bell's our aerodynamicist, and he'll carry on doing the aerodynamics. And we've got a suspension guy who looks after the suspension, and I already do the stress analysis, and there's a design team here. And we'll just carry on.
Yeah.
And so he agreed and put me in, I was a senior person in the drawing office at the time, and so he put me in charge as chief designer.
Yeah.
Me having given him this little sales pitch. So he walked out of the room, and I sort of went, so now we've got to do it.
Yeah. So, but you seem to manage fairly well. And,
well, you could see that it's very important to have a good design team. And in those days, it's much smaller than it is today.
Yeah.
But back then, our total technical staff was 17 people, whereas today
it sounds crazy compared to nowadays.
A couple of hundred or something, I suppose. So 17 people. It was really quite good in a way, because being that small, you had to do a wide variety of tasks, and so you got a broad experience.
Yeah.
These days, everything is so compartmentalized and in these tiny little specialist areas.
Yeah.
And it's not really conducive to producing a generalist, that understands the whole car. Whereas back then, you worked in all sorts of areas, and it gave you generalized experience. And so I've always thought, you can have your one genius designer, and he can take you to a certain level, but to go beyond that, you really need a team of people.
Yeah.
So the importance of teamwork it's difficult to overemphasize the importance, and you need to establish and build a team like you design a car. You've almost got to design the design team.
Yeah.
And the people, they have to learn to work together, and you want a team of people that like each other, respect each other, think in the same way. They're all pulling in the same direction.
Yeah.
And they sort of enjoy the success of their partners in the project.
Yeah.
Ron sometimes used to say, you like to see competition between the technical staff, and I said, you don't want competition inside the team, inside the company. You want cooperation inside the team. Competition is what we do to the people in the other teams. So teamwork was very important to me.
Great.
And I used to get a lot of pleasure out of seeing the guys in the team have ideas, come up with things.
Yeah.
It would fulfill them and make them want to give more. And, So it was really...
What became a typical working day for you was, as you've sort of covered it a little bit with wandering around. You'd sort of be on lots of different jobs.
Well, yeah, there were long days inevitably, and especially as the project came to a climax.
Yeah.
You'd be working longer and longer hours trying to get it all done, and sort of not enough hours in the day, and I mean typical work day in those sort of periods. My job was as a generalist, so to speak, taking everything that my team members would come up with and bring to me, and melding it all together in a continuous, integrated design, so to speak, in all areas: gearbox, engine, chassis, aerodynamics, all of that. And so I like to have all my experts in aerodynamics and gearbox and structure and suspension and that sort of thing. And I'd be you'd arrive at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and there'd people with questions, and it seemed like almost all day long you'd be talking to these various peoples, and what are we going to do, that sort of thing. And it might be 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening before I'd sit down in a calmer atmosphere and do some of the stuff that I needed to do, more conceptual thing and layouts and things like that. And in the intense periods, as the project was becoming more and more advanced, there'd be periods, especially with the MP44, say, we started quite late with that project because we didn't sign the deal with Honda until August, and I didn't really want to start on the design until we knew what the major components were going to be, i.e. the engine, for example. So it was quite a late start. So the days, I'd be there till nearly 11 o'clock most nights, and it was quite funny because I didn't really have time to, do things like cook meals and all that. So I used to knock off at about 10:45 because I could just get to McDonald's in time for a burger before
you said you got
before they closed.
Quite friendly with the security guard at McDonald's.
Yeah, there was this burly security guard there, and I'd walk in at just before 11, and him and me would be the only ones there. And he'd be looking at me like, "You sad bastard! Do you have anywhere better to be?" So it would go on like that for a few weeks, but ultimately, it was very rewarding.
Yeah. So, 1988 season, the car's doing well. It misses out on one race, which was Italy. Were you there that weekend?
Oh yeah, I was at all 16 of the races that year. It was quite nice actually, because having been given the opportunity to design that car, then during the last half of '87, and during the '88 season, I was Senna's race engineer. So I went to all the races and helped him to his first World Championship.
Yeah.
So really fantastic opportunity. You're working for a major Formula One team with a major budget, and you're working with legends like Prost and Senna.
Yeah.
And I know legend becomes almost a cliche these days, but those guys really were legends.
Yeah.
So it was very intense. You're working with superstar, legendary drivers wanting to win not anything insignificant, but a world championship in Formula One, and team owners like Ron Dennis, and there's all these people that are wanting a result, and the pressure's on to deliver a result, and you don't want to screw it up for somebody like Senna trying to win a world championship. So it was very intense, but I liked the pressure.
Yeah.
And it made it feel like you were doing something significant, and it was on TV and worldwide audience of millions, and if you screwed up, it was going to be pretty public. The pit lane job it's quite enjoyable, and there's this pressure at the design phase, and then the additional pressure of running the car at the circuit in front of millions of people. And I likened it, I'm a little bit afraid of heights, but I can't resist the temptation to look over the edge, you know.
Right.
And in the pit lane, running a car in a qualifying session or whatever, it feels a little bit like walking along the edge of a cliff.
Yeah.
And just making sure that you don't fall off.
Yeah.
So kind of a high pressure,
Yeah.
tense situation.
And what was the atmosphere like that weekend in Italy? Was it the mechanical failure that took the team out?
There were a couple of things happened. Prost's car started to not run right, and he knew it was going to fail. And it turned out it was a spark plug that failed, so
right,
a fairly minor sort of component that
Yeah.
put him out of the race. He was a bit naughty in a way because he knew that he wasn't going to finish, and so he went all out in the early stages using too much fuel.
right,
And Senna felt like he had to respond and try to follow, and then Prost's engine broke, and now Senna was in fuel debt, so to speak,
Yeah.
several laps behind
yeah,
on the fuel. So at that point, you can't just use horsepower. You know, you got to reduce the revs, turn the boost down, lift
Yeah.
and coast, do all that stuff they talk about these days.
yeah,
And you got to take it all out of yourself. You know, you have to drive the car right on the limit, every corner,
yeah,
every lap, save fuel. You know, people talk about save fuel, it's an economy run, but really it's sort of the opposite. Yes, you've got to save fuel, but you've still got to go fast. That means you don't have the luxury of horsepower. You've
Yeah.
got to deliver the goods
Yeah.
yourself. And that's what he was doing. And of course, the famous incident, we arrive at the first chicane and there's Schlesser sort of in the way, and being fair to him, he's trying to do all he can to stay out of the way. And Senna arrives at this scenario, and bear in mind he's got maybe 100th of a second or so to decide what he's
Yeah.
going to do.
yeah,
And he knows he's got to go for it every corner, every lap, so he went for it, and unfortunately it just didn't quite work out.
yeah. It came good at the end of the season when he did win the World Championship.
Yeah.
And both McLarens did very well, didn't they?
Yeah, and it was a very good season. You know, missed one race out of the 16. We qualified on pole 15 times, and we had 10 races. We finished first and second. So
Yeah.
it was a wonderful season, really.
And it's an award that's still held by the MP44, that it was the most successful car to have ever campaigned. It might be about to be beaten, but you've come out and congratulated Adrian Newey on.
That's true. We've had a nice run with the record, I suppose, 30 odd years.
Yeah.
But it's looking like
It could be.
it could well be broken this year.
Is that a sad moment? Or I know you've worked with Adrian Newey, so
Well, it's in a way it's kind of a sad thing, I guess, because nothing goes on forever. And I have always kind of thought, from a sporting point of view, it's kind of good that we missed the one race. It gives something for other teams to shoot at. And unfortunately, that would disappear if Red Bull and Max and Adrian do complete the perfect season and finish all the races. Then what do you do for an encore for that?
Well, that's it. Yeah,
I guess you try to do 2 perfect seasons in a row or something. But,
we spoke a little bit about it yesterday, actually. That the season with Ayrton Senna, he was having to put up a fight pretty much all of the races. Really, all the footage you see is end to tail, and he really did. He dominated, but he was driving well, and he had his pressure moments. And
it was a very good year, really, because I put Prost and Senna on the same level. Senna was my guy, and so I wanted him to win, of course. But Prost was just as good as Senna, really. You know, Senna was maybe a little bit more on the upward side of his career, and maybe Prost was just slightly going on the downside. But if you could align the peaks, I'd say they were equivalent. And so you had this battle between the two of them, you know, every race. And I kind of liken it to the America's Cup yacht racing. It's a match race between two boats, and this was like a match race of the two best drivers in the world in a really good car, head to head every race.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this year it's kind of Max. On his own.
It's your biggest competition, though, isn't it? Your teammate, because you've got the same kit.
Yeah.
So it's always been like that. And,
so we'll have to see. If they do win all the races, then certainly Adrian, as the designer of that car, is a worthy successor to the record. So in that respect, maybe a little bit sad, but for 30 odd years
it's not too bad, is it?
kind of held that accolade, and it would be good to pass it on to such a worthy competitor.
Yeah. Do you still speak to the team that helped design the 4.4?
Some of them. I mean, it's been a long time ago now, and everybody's gone their own way. But I still see some of those
that's nice.
Guys.
So in '89, you were just speaking about how good Prost was. He moved over to Ferrari, and you followed him in effect.
That was so the end of '89. He was off to Ferrari, and it was interesting because I was Senna's race engineer, but he recognised that I had designed the car, and so it was me that he wanted to come with him to Ferrari. Ron and I were in disagreement about the way the technical side of the company should be organised. We had in 1986, as I said before, I was put in charge as the chief designer, and it was a very intense period there. We had Neil Oatley, the designer from Williams, had joined us, and we knew that the turbo car was only going to have 1 year, and we had to do a normally aspirated car for the following year. So in that period, we designed the MP43 with the Porsche Tag Turbo engine, and then we did a 3B with the new Honda engine in it to test that, and then we did the '88 car, the MP44, and we did an MP44B with the 10-cylinder normally aspirated engine, and then we did the MP45, which was the definitive '89 race car with the V10 Honda engine. And then the following year, the MP46 with a V12 engine. So, with 17 people.
That's quite a big achievement.
That's quite a list of cars from the period 87 to 91. So you got 4 years and 5 or 6 cars you're doing. Several of those weren't complete ground-up designs. But still,
big achievement.
A lot of work going into all of that.
Yeah. Did you find there was a big difference between how Ferrari was run and how McLaren was run?
Yeah, it's night and day difference. McLaren was a well-oiled machine, and Ferrari was chaos. So, it's interesting working at Ferrari. The Italians are so passionate, and they're sort of rabid Ferrari fans, and it's nice to see their enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And, the Italians, they're nice people, and their enthusiasm and their love of racing and Ferrari, it's all quite nice. I know there's this story about all drivers want to drive for Ferrari at some stage, and some people say the same thing about designers. I'd never really felt like that, but Ron and I disagreed on the organization, and as I say, I had 6 months to do the MP44, and Neil had 18 months to do the MP45, and Ron wanted to continue that sort of organization where we would alternate. Now I'd do every other car, and so I'd do the even years, Neil would do the odd years. I said I didn't like that idea, and I wanted to apply all of the brain power to all of the cars. And I thought, due to the success of the MP44, I had earned the right to be the one in charge. He didn't agree, and Another funny little story. Gerard Ducourage, great guy, and I had a really friendly sort of pit lane association with him, and unfortunately for Gerard, we were making him look a little bad with Lotus using the same engine as us, but he was brilliant about that.
Yeah.
And he said to me, "Don't let Ron get away with it. Make sure that you get the money." but Ron wouldn't give in on the money, and so, I went to Ferrari because I felt, well, they would pay the money.
Yeah.
Not that was the most important thing, but they had the resources. They had the desire, and but they had a big budget and a lot of resources, human resources, and all that. So, it just seemed like a good thing. But it wasn't until I arrived there, and you sort of walk down this hall, and there's all these pictures on the wall, and it's kind of antique-y. There's these sort of sepia-tone pictures of all these legendary drivers that have driven for Ferrari, and you think,
this is quite special.
There is a little something to the mystique of Ferrari.
Yeah.
Back then, it was kind of classy as well.
Yeah.
I remember once we were at a test somewhere, and I'm in the motorhome looking out the window, and there's the transporter there, this big red Arctic, and a great big Ferrari emblem, the Cavallino, and Ferrari written on it.
Yeah.
And that was it. Down along the bottom there was a grey strip with various suppliers in very small decals, and it's just classy.
Yeah.
It's just Ferrari. And
yeah.
That was it. And even our uniforms, the technical staff and the management, our uniform for the track was a white shirt with the Ferrari emblem and some navy blue trousers.
Yeah.
And now, you dress up in these clown suits with sponsors everywhere. It really
different era, wasn't it?
Just seemed.
There's some great shots of you on the pit wall actually from that era, and from McLaren really, with the old Marlboro overall, the sort of coats on and things like that. Right?
McLaren, in contrast, I guess you're dressed up in this red and white get-up in honor of Marlboro, but they're paying the wages. not the nicest looking outfit, but yeah.
In fact, Adrian Newey talks about in his book that everything in McLaren was grey. You walked into the offices and everything was grey.
Ron's like that. He just loves grey, and everything is grey. It's really, the new factory, when we moved from Boundary Road into the new factory, the black box we used to call it, because it was all this sort of black glass thing. But interior's just grey. Everything's grey. Desks are grey. Walls are grey. You used to joke that if you stood still very long, you'd get painted grey.
I don't think he took it too well from what Adrian said. When Adrian decided he wanted all his office to be redone in something that wasn't grey.
Yeah, so he had the the building management people. He had him repaint his office in duck egg blue emulsion or something. Ron was but he could get away. Adrian being Adrian, he could do anything, I suppose.
You'll have spoken about it so much, you're probably sick of it, but there was a dispute that came out with you and Gordan Murray. He was claiming that the design of the MP44 was his doing.
That's been a long-running saga, I suppose. I had been assigned by Ron as chief designer, and I don't know. He felt the need to hire Gordan, and Gordan had just come from his disastrous BT55, and I don't know. He'd tell a story another way, but people I talked to about him, he'd been forced out because of that, and Ron felt the need to hire him, needed a name or something, I suppose.
Yeah.
But Ron at the time said that he didn't hire Gordan to design cars. He hired him to do other things, one funny statement Ron made was, show us how to win championships. And I thought, well, we've already won more championships than Brabham, so what's that all about? And to be honest, the whole design team didn't want Gordan there.
Right.
We're competitive, like the drivers are competitive, and our ideal would be to beat Williams with Patrick Head there at full strength, and let's try to beat him.
Yeah.
We wanted to beat Brabham with Gordan Murray there at full strength.
Yeah.
We wanted to do it. We didn't want to hire somebody to do it. So we weren't, to be absolutely honest, we weren't too keen on the idea and didn't really want him there. Gordan himself said he'd become bored with Formula One design and it had become all too easy.
Right.
And I thought, if you think it's too easy, then you're just not trying hard enough. Kind of reminds me of the one-liner from Mario Andretti when he said about driving the car, if you feel like you're always 100% in control, you're just not going fast enough. So Gordan came along, and he was very laid back and relaxed, and he just let us get on with the job. And so we did.
Yeah.
I got the impression that he was, I don't know, a little bit burned out, disinterested, whatever, and he'd be involved in managerial things, coordination of the production side with the drawing office, and doing he was the technical director, so he'd be doing not so much technical stuff, but directorial sort of stuff, with the rest of the board of directors,
right.
But it didn't really interfere much at all with the design. And I don't know, maybe he thought it wasn't going to be very successful because we weren't legendary designers like Gordan and Barnard and Patrick Head and the like. But I think when it turned out the car was brilliant, that he got more interested.
Yeah.
And to be fair, just started claiming things that just weren't true.
Yeah.
And I thought that I could understand why he was doing that. The BT55 had been such a disaster and then he'd left Brabham, pushed or jumped. Difference of opinion there, I guess. But claiming the MP44 was a way to sort of expunge the blot in his copybook with the BT55, and he could claim, you see the McLaren is low and the BT55 is low, and this is me correcting the 55 and doing it right this time. But he had very little to do with it, almost nothing to do with the design. But as it became more and more successful, I think it became more and more desirable for him to claim
right, and
more and more credit. If you talk to some interviews he's done and things, you can tell that he doesn't know very much at all about the cars, its detail and the intricacies of the design or whatever. So that's just kind of the way it's developed. Over the
in contrast to that, there was one. We went racing last year in Zandvoort, and there was a 4.5. It was 5.5, 4.6.
Yeah, there was a
you were pointing out things that only
MP41.
Right,
the Cosworth cars. Yeah.
You were pointing out things that only somebody who'd been behind the scenes of that company would know. The design of the inside of the wishbones and little locks and things that you said. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, thinking about this, and there was no denying that you were the man behind.
You see, in those days when I first started with Project 4, there were three of us: John Barnard, Alan Jenkins, and me.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
And we had progressed a long way down the road to building a complete, designing and starting to manufacture a complete Formula One car. And then with the amalgamation with McLaren, we inherited another designer from Team McLaren, John Baldwin, and a couple of draftsmen, Colin Smith and Mike Loughlin, so the team began to expand.
Yeah.
But even when we won the first World Championship in 1984, it was 8 people, maybe. It was the whole technical staff. It's a small team. So,
Yeah.
as I've said before, you're able to get a broad experience when the team
Yeah.
is that small. So, looking at those cars in Zandvoort, you almost forget, because I'd be describing things to you and you'd think, oh, yeah, I did those brakes, and that front rocker, and the lower wishbone, and the upright. Oh yeah, and the rear upright, and the wishbone. Yeah, actually. And of course, it was all under the direction of John Barnard.
Yeah.
His concept, his design. But you could do all these things.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
This
isn't it,
broad
compared to nowadays?
experience. So.
You've told me so many stories that I couldn't pick one out to talk about, really. So, is there one that really sticks with you from your racing years and the
McLaren thing?
Well, anything that you think, yeah.
Well, there's just so many, and I suppose you could say for days probably me telling you various stories as I remember them.
Yeah.
So it's just too many to remember, and some of the early experiences. You're working quite hard for quite a few years, and then you win at Silverstone. That first win at Silverstone, British Grand Prix, British driver. It's quite an experience.
Huge. Yeah.
The tension that built up there, it got the better of John.
Yeah.
As the race was wearing on and coming to its conclusion, and he grabbed both Alan Jenkins and me and says, "Come on!" And we just went out in the middle of Silverstone, out in a field, just to sort of be away from, because the tension was. Yeah. It was getting to be, so great.
That's what you build it up to when you're designing all these cars, but when it actually happens, it's just a moment that you can't conceive, really. It's just.
I guess another one is it's a joyful thing, winning a Formula One race, and even more so winning a Formula One World Championship. Ferrari is another interesting experience because the outburst of joy in Italy when they win a race. Yeah. And particularly Maranello, and they ring the church bells. It's just such an incredible thing to win a race with Ferrari.
Yeah.
So there's
that's amazing. There's a couple of more questions. It's just the last one I've been asking is, who do you think the greatest driver of all time was? It goes back to this status, but I suppose.
Well, I think a little bit different about this to most people. You see people either do top 10 greatest drivers ever. Yeah. It's very hard for me to do something like that, because if you take some of the early people, Ascari, Farina, Fangio, I have no experience of those people, and the racing was so different, the cars were so different, and the circuits and all of that. And so I have to think more in terms of my era, I suppose. And even then, I would pick several drivers that I would say were pretty much equivalent, and they were all capable of driving the car to the limits of the laws of physics. Yeah. But in slightly different eras, so it'd be very hard for me to distinguish one above the other. I guess one of the first great drivers I dealt with was Niki Lauda, and just incredible talent, otherworldly sort of thing. And then he came up against Prost, but as I alluded to earlier, Niki was probably on the downside of his career and Prost on the upside, and then a few years later, Prost was slightly on the downside and Senna was coming. But if you could align the peaks, I couldn't pick any one of those three. Yeah, that was better than the other. Jim Clark, just before my time, but obviously an incredible.
What was it like being close to Niki Lauda?
He was an amazing person, such determination. All of the drivers have their various characteristics, and some stronger in some areas and others in other areas. And the most amazing thing I found about Lauda was just his iron-willed determination.
Yeah.
Never give up, and just, it was just unbelievable, really.
Yeah.
And when he was up against Prost in the '84 season, and he'd say to me, God, this little Frenchman, he's just so quick.
Yeah.
And, I can't benefit from his quickness, but, we developed the car and he benefits from that, and then he's naturally quick and he beats me. And he said to me, we got to the French Grand Prix, middle of the season, and he says, ride out to the circuit with me. And so he got in his hire car to ride out to the circuit at Dijon. And he says, I've been trying my absolute hardest to beat this little Frenchman. But, God, he's so quick. And now we are halfway through the season. He's 17 points ahead, and he's just so quick.
Yeah.
And he said, I've been trying my hardest. But he said, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to try even harder. I am going to win this race, and I am going to win this championship. And I thought, you're 17 points behind. Only half the season to go.
Yeah.
But he did win that race.
Yeah.
It was quite fortuitous because I think Prost had a wheel come loose. But he won that race.
Yeah.
Last race, the ultimate in tension and pressure. And Portugal. It's all up for grabs. And it's the only time I've ever seen Nicky sort of lose a little bit because of the pressure.
Yeah.
He was so good under pressure. But night before the race, and we start the engine up, and there's the intercoolers on the turbo engine. It was a two-stage thing, air to air and water to air.
Yeah.
And there was a little water leak. And he freaked. Just chill. We'll sort it. We've got time.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Go to the hotel. We'll sort it.
Yeah.
So next day at the race, he has a bad start and he drops it. I can't, way down the field as I can't remember, 13th, 14th, 17th, something. Yeah. And I'm thinking, oh God, but. Slowly, surely, one car at a time, he's moving up through the grid. Prost is leading. He needs to be second to win the world championship.
Yeah.
And I think, oh God, it's just not working out. Prost, Mansell, Lauda. One place required. And then Mansell had a problem and dropped out, and he won the world championship by half a point.
What a moment.
Pretty
great.
Pretty incredible. So, that race, a lot of pressure. I lost it a little bit once, and the pressure and the tension and all of that. It was incredible. It was kind of funny. Alan Jenkins was Prost's race engineer, and we're sat out on the pit wall the night before the race, BSing and looking at the garages and the mechanics beavering away, and I noticed that Prost was in garage number 13, and I said to Alan Jenkins, "Oh look, Prost in garage number 13, unlucky." He's sort of, And then I said, I was up all night last night moving the numbers on the garage all down. So Nicky wasn't in 13, Prost, which was bullshit. Just a joke, but he wasn't appreciative. So at the end of that race, we'd finished first and second in the race. We'd won the world championship. Lauda had won his final world championship. And everybody is joyful except for Prost, Alan Jenkins, and his three mechanics.
Yeah.
And it seemed a little sad to me that those four guys had to suffer a bit of
yeah.
disappointment after what
There's
was
always a
an
loser,
epic season.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you very much for coming up and appearing. Thank you for tuning into the Racing Years. We've only scratched the surface with Steve, really. He goes on and on. But you've just recently designed, and well, it's in production now, the Nichols N1A, which we might do a bit of footage around, if that's okay with you, as a part 2. Yeah. If you're up for that, comment and let us know what you think.
Yeah,
and
we can do something there.
Yeah, hopefully we'll do a part 2. So thank you very much.
Okay.
That's it.